All right. When I think of someone who practices what he preaches, I think of Dhati Lewis. And this morning, I'm with him here to discuss his book, Advocates. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of people I talk to. When I read this book, though, and I've always said to you before, you're a great author, man.
Oh,
I mean, in all seriousness, you start off the book, though. If you don't, in fact, you probably could read it for me, in fact, man. My name is Dhati Lewis. I'm a black man married to a white woman, pastoring a diverse church. What made you decide to write about race in a day and age where people just don't want to talk about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that opening line, I just want to be very upfront. I mean, this is something that is not a philosophy or a theory or just something that is just something that we're talking about. This is core to my own identity. I grew up, my mom went to join Black Panther Party. I grew up, I have cousins that are in the Nation of Islam. I grew up with a real reality, a very sense of pride about being black and African American, you know, but also with the reality of being African American in America. And then all of a sudden, when I started falling in love with a white woman, it struck me at the core of my identity.
Really?
You know, here I am as a Christian. I was Mr. Racial Reconciliation guy, but now all of a sudden, I just had a preference to marry a black woman. But now I'm falling in love with a white woman. And so I'm just like now wrestling with this identity. And I had to really determine through this time, and God took me through a series of things, that what's more important, the adjective in front of Christian or Christian? You know, the fact that I'm a black Christian or just that I'm Christian. And I really had to wrestle. So this book really came out of me wrestling through and going through an identity crisis that I had. And if I had time, and I shared, I think in the book, is the struggle that I had with my own identity. And this is really what I see going on in America, is that we're struggling with an identity crisis. Who are we?
Yeah.
You know, and I think so many times, and so, you know, I think there's no better place to go than to the scriptures to find a sense of who we are, because God, He's the one who's created us. And so that's kind of why I started off in that way.
And full disclosure, I followed you for several times, for several years, man. And I say practice what you preach because, man, you are pastoring a church that is incredibly diverse. You're here at the North American Mission Board as one of their vice presidents. I mean, your life is diversity. So when you talk about the narrow path to racial reconciliation, what do you mean about that? Is that a fair question?
Well, I mean, that's simple. It's based off of the verse in Matthew chapter 7, right? 12 through 14, it's the golden rule. Treat others in the way you want to be treated, right? And then that verse continues on, I won't quote it all, but just in verse 13, 14, as it goes on, it talks about the path is wide, the road is narrow. Yeah. And so God gives us a narrow road. A lot of times when people talk about racial reconciliation, I think they take on, a posture of by any means necessary. But that's not the posture that we can take as Christians, because the problem is that we have this thing called the Bible.
Yeah.
And the Bible gives us bumper rails, right? That you got to stay between the lines. You got to color between the lines. So I like to say it's not by any means necessary. It's really by all possible means. And what are those possible means? I think that God has given us those in His Scripture.
Wow. You talk about Paul in here. Why him?
Yeah. I think Paul gives us a unique perspective, right? As one who is dealing, and specifically in Philemon, who's dealing with racial tension, racial injustice. Yeah. We got to remember, the Apostle Paul was a missionary to the Gentiles. He was an ethnic Jew as a missionary to Gentile believers. And it just wasn't one Gentile, it was multiple. So he was very fluent in navigating through racial issues, cultural issues, racial things. I think Philemon is a manifestation of having to navigate through this type of tension. Now, it may not be specifically racial in that context, but it's about reconciliation. And Paul is on the outside, because a lot of times when you're dealing with injustices or tensions, you either deal with the oppressed and the oppressor, or the perceived oppressed and the perceived oppressor. But a lot of times what we lose is that third position, the one of an advocate. And I think Paul comes in, and he's that one on the outside looking in, and he recognizes that either I can be an advocate or I can be an aggravator. And I think a lot of times when people, you and I, as we're looking on the outside and looking at what we perceive to be as injustice, that we can either become an advocate or we can just stir it up and become more of an aggravator.
Do you see yourself as an advocate? Like I do. I want to answer your question for you. Do you see yourself as that?
Yeah, I mean, we had to. I've had to, and part of it is because of my own journey.
Yeah.
And my own story, and I've had to kind of wrestle through that in my own tension. But also, when you think about this idea of the context that we're in, I talk about this, and I just remember this being at the election, during the elections, and it was like when President Trump was elected, and I just would never forget this idea, and I was just like, this is happening. And in pastoring a church that. There's people at our church who voted for President Trump.
Yeah.
But then there's people at our church that think if you voted for President Trump, you're the devil, right? And so there's this tension that we have. And I was just like, man, we need to talk. We need to come to the table. And we got to stop being so undivided, because the Bible says that we are advocates. We are ambassadors. He has given us the ministry of reconciliation, and our appeal and our message is be reconciled. And so I don't think Christians have any other choice but to be a reconciler, an advocate for reconciliation. Now, in doing that, I'm not saying that we don't address real issues. We have to address real issues. But in addressing those real issues, we must have the goal of reconciliation. Anything else, I think, is unbiblical.
What do you say to people, Dhati, who go, I am tired of talking about this issue of race? They are fatigued over it. You talked about awareness in the book. They're aware, but they are aware of their own personal limitations on this. What do you say to folks who are just tired of it?
I'd say I understand. I get it.
Really?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Just think about it. If you have brought up something continually, over and over and over again, and you felt like there was no change that took place after doing that. Or if you're someone who's constantly been accused of something over and over and over again, and you change, but then no one is feeling like you've done enough, that's draining.
Yeah.
That makes you sad. That makes you angry. There's hurt. There's a ton of that's in there. And the fact of the matter is both can be true, equally true. But the question is not whether or not we're tired or fatigued or any of that. That's not the question. Paul said he was poured out like a drink offering. Like he ran his race. So fatigue should not be our North Star. It should not be the thing that drives or not drives, whether we're tired or not tired. Like, are we tired of talking about sin? We've been sinning since the beginning. Since Adam, we have not figured it out. So are we done? Should we stop talking about? No. So this is an application of our human hearts, is that it's a sin issue that is manifesting itself in this way. And I think that as long as we are human, we are going to have to talk about the things that divide us. And for Americans, race is one of the top three.
Now, you lead a very diverse church on all fronts, man. I've been there several times. Great church, by the way. You're in the middle of what I would say is diversity when it comes to socioeconomic issues. How do you deal with being in a diverse area, leading a diverse church, and you are also a diverse pastor? How do you do all that?
Well, I think one of the things is, first and foremost, I think it's God's sovereignty. I wasn't raised a believer, but God's providence and his sovereignty in my life, I think he's prepared me for this. I'm a son of a professional football player, and I remember being middle class, upper middle class, going. And the story that a lot of times people don't know is that as soon as my dad's career was over, literally the next year I'm on welfare. So I go from affluent to welfare. I go from going into kind of a multi-ethnic, kind of upper middle class kind of context to lower middle class, which is mainly made up of people of color, Black, Hispanic, in that context. And then I go back into the high school context where, again, there's a small percentage of African Americans. And so I've been in and out. And even as a believer, I felt comfortable in an all-minority context. I felt comfortable in a majority context. And I think God was kind of writing a story in my life that to prepare me for a time in a season like this where I can be real because I don't have to be fake. I can just be who I am. And at the same time, I think God has prepared me, and especially if I recognize that God has given us the platform. And you got to understand, Paul, Paul is navigating through this. I believe that the book of Romans, the book of Galatians, Ephesians,
Wow.
he's addressing racial tensions, ethnic tensions, and he's saying this is what the gospel, this is how the gospel helps us to overcome these things.
But you believe the Bible should be a part of our conversation when it comes to race?
Oh, 100%.
Do you think that is being left out right now?
Oh, yes. I mean, on all sides.
Like in the church too, you think it's being left out?
all sides.
Okay.
All sides. And I think it's, because of the fact that we don't make we don't look at it holistically, look at the scriptures holistically, and so for instance, we're talking about the issue in Galatians. Galatians, a lot of times when you hear about Galatians, you hear, oh, that's the gospel letter. It's about the gospel and maintaining the integrity of the gospel. Yes. But I really believe that the book of Galatians is primarily answering the question, how Jewish do I need to be in order to be Christian?
Wow.
We are talking to a Gentile nation, or Paul is going on, and he says, how much do you have to become like other Jews in order to be Christian? How much ramifications would that have when we talk about this divorce from white evangelicalism, when we talk about all these things, that the gospel is always going to be put into cultural garbs? The real question that we need to be asking one another is how, we need to be able to differentiate, let me say it that way, between what's cultural and what's gospel, what's biblical. And I think we, have to become better and more aware at doing that. And the more that we're able to do that, I think the better that we will be able to really understand that God is calling all of us. And so that we can finally begin to be a small, dim reflection of what we're going to see in Revelation chapter 7 of a kingdom where from every nation, every tribe coming together, not just worshiping together, but I think living life and experiencing God together in his fullness.
I'll put you on the spot because, you're here at the North American Mission Board and one of their vice presidents. Where do you see the church going, this issue of race, next 5-10 years? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to address it.
You do?
And primarily, if we're going to be effective specifically in urban context.
What if we don't want to address it, though, Dhati?
I think it's a gospel issue. And the reason why is that we have to address the issues that our country is facing. The polarization that's going on in our country is getting more and more polarized.
Wow.
And if we don't come with a solution, then we miss it. And going back, that's what I was saying. Paul was seeing this in Rome. He was seeing these churches, Jews and Gentiles separating, can't worship together, different sanctuaries, different living. He was just like, I want for you guys to partner with me because I want to go to Spain, but I can't even ask you guys to partner with me because you're so divided. And because you're so divided, the issue is really a gospel issue. So he spends 11 chapters just showing this is a gospel issue.
Yeah.
And then he gives us the famous, therefore, present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy, acceptable, pleasing to God. I really believe he's talking to Jews and Gentiles who can't get along. Churches, godly people on both sides, for some reason are not able to overcome this ethnic tension and the ethnic cultural things. It's like, let's address it. But you see what I'm saying? It's real easy for us to kind of overlook it. Let's just imagine in this way. Let's just say for 5 years, all the current believers got kicked out of America.
Yeah.
And let's just say that God supernaturally, through the gospel, started saving Muslims.
Okay.
Right? 5 years later, we're let back in. And now it's mainly, God has still doing this thing. There's tons of Christians, but they're Muslims. And now they're praying a certain way. They're doing a certain things. Us as American Christians come back in was like,
wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah.
This is not Christian.
Yeah.
Right? That's what happened in Rome. There were people who were kicked out.
Wow.
They came back, and now all of a sudden these Gentiles, the Jewish people come back and was like, this ain't Christian. Because it was wrapped up in their cultural understanding.
Norms,
of expression of Christianity. So we got to recognize that these are real issues that are so tied into our culture that we can't separate the two. It's called syncretism.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think what the beauty of the gospel, the beauty of what Paul is navigating through, he's allowing us to see this tension, see how we're so wrapped up. And he says, but the gospel is so much greater. It's so much bigger, and it's worthy to fight for.
Last two questions. I can't believe we're here. Man, you talk about, the book was convicting, by the way, to me. I really had to go back and go, man, where do I stand? Am I more of a Christian, or am I more culturally into my own self? And so I'm asking this question coming from someone who was convicted by the book. How can we be practical at being advocates?
Yeah.
What are some practical points?
Honestly, that's the whole idea of the book. I really wanted to give handlebars to people who really want to be
Well, you did,
part of it.
by the way.
Because, I'm an optimist. Let me just go ahead and say that. And I try to wish and hope and think that people genuinely want solutions.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we're real good at what I call anti-vision. We're just not good at vision. We're real good at saying what's wrong. We're just not good at describing where we're going, what's right, what could it be. And so really what I wanted to do is it's like, what are some good handlebars that we can give to people to basically begin to create some categories so we can begin to have conversations. And so that's really how I wrote the book, is so that people who genuinely want to live it out, that they can read it, they can begin to get definition, and they can begin to have real conversation, honest conversation with one another, but they can have the posture that I believe that we see in Scripture that calls for us to be advocates.
Well, like I just said, it was a great book to read, to make that clear, but it convicted on so many levels. Like, I can't see anybody can put this down and not go, man, that hurts a little bit. So thank you for that. In some ways, I wrestled with it a lot, to be honest with you. So I'm asking this question in a good way, and I love when people ask this question because you've already written this great book here. Did you say everything you wanted to say in the book? And I hope not, because I think there needs to be another one.
No, I 100% did not say. I knew I wasn't going to answer the question of race in the book.
So is there another book coming?
No,
I hope.
well,
no,
I
you're
don't
like
know
9 times
about
soon,
that,
man. We're on this one.
Yeah, but I wanted to give one that I would read. I'm a football player, former football player. Like, I wanted to read something I would read. Among Wolves, I was kind of like...
Which I love that book, by the way.
It was a good book, but it was like, it's on... Like, when I pick up books that are real thick,
really?
I'm just kind of like...
I love that book.
Good. Well, thank you.
This one's good, too. I know we're talking about this one, but that was a good one also. I highly recommend that one, in fact.
So this book I wanted to write, and I just really want to give people handlebars that begin to have the conversation. I think if we're going to really go on a deep level, there's so much more that needs to be said, so much more that needs to journey. But this is a good starter, primer, for people who want to put handlebars in, who want to have this conversation, and they really want to have God's posture of reconciliation.
Now, did you write for people to wrestle through also?
Yeah, just wrestle through who are you. And I've had people come to me and says, man, thank you for writing this book. I've seen that I've been an aggravator in so many different ways.
Yeah, that was the hardest part for me, aggravator, and just my awareness.
Yeah.
I struggled with that one too, because it's a great wrestling book, man.
I
would say you did a great job. You don't need me saying that. I'm always, always thankful to be with you. We joke about a lot of stuff, but thank you for your time, man. It was good.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.